Now let's talk about the concepts around polyvagal theory and why it's so important that you understand in your body how you had to respond to parents who were narcissistic and or borderline. Now, of course, a borderline parent is going to have a probably much more constantly moving system of their own in terms of their autonomic nervous system responses as they struggle to stay regulated. And oftentimes a narcissistic parent can be almost, misattuned or disengaged and maybe more shut down or rigid unless they get angry and activated, in which case they can be very intense, very emotional, and very much in a very fight or flight dynamic. So just to understand the concepts around our autonomic nervous system or our nervous system, what we're talking about is that it's like a reflex. At all times, our bodies are responding to cues of safety or danger in the environment. And Dr. Stephen Porges, who is the father of polyvagal theory, really uses this concept of the vagus nerve, or his understanding, I should say, of the vagus nerve, to explain how our bodies are going into fight or flight, or shut down, or collapse, or how we can be in a sort of connected state. Now that is a very simplified version. And really it isn't about focusing on the vagus nerve so much as understanding that this nerve is a highway that allows for the hierarchy to occur. So on the hierarchy, as you'll see in your workbook, I want you to think of your nervous system as having three main parts of a ladder. The first level is your ventral vagal state. This is the state of connection, when you're being able to be understood and you're calm and engaged. And then we go to the sympathetic state, a part of our nervous system. This is what's thought of as fight or flight. As I said, it is more than that, but it really is about what's called mobilization, gearing up for some kind of action. It could be running away, it could be pushing back. There's like an energy push, a need there. And then what we do with it depends upon the circumstances. And the third rung of the ladder is the dorsal vagal. This is the collapsed, disconnected state. Now, each of these states can also align in some regards with attachment theory because our nervous systems set the stage for attachment, meaning that I'm an infant, I'm born, and immediately my caregiver, through their attachment style, is going to be responding in certain ways. Are they very anxious and always activated, always, or more often in that sympathetic state? Are they very shut down and collapsed? Are they able to be engaging and soothing for the most part, not perfectly, in that more ventral vagal? And so we can see mirroring in attachment patterns where a ventral vagal state, or a parent who tends to stay more in that place, would likely be more secure in attachment. A parent who is very anxious and kind of angry or both, one or the other, or activated, might be more in a sympathetic state. And then a baby who was, or a parent who was more in the shut down would be in dorsal vagal. And for disorganized, and that would be avoidant. And for disorganized, we might see both. We might see a parent who kind of just goes from anxious to dorsal, collapse to actively sympathetic and overly engaged. And so their nervous systems are here, and we have to sort of match and meet their nervous system as an infant wherever they are. And so over time, right through the attachment responses and reciprocity, just like we're learning an attachment, if I cry too much, I get put in my crib for a long time. And that happens so much, I learn to shut down my attachment needs as an avoidant. Or if I'm, super clingy or fearful, actually my parent seems to respond to that because anxious parents, for example, they're good at fear. They understand fear. And so all of that has an impact on our bodies. We are wired so early on to have these nervous system responses to our primary caregivers. And so that is why you can't just understand your attachment. You have to also work on learning to soothe your body. So the main concepts are this hierarchy, right, of this ladder dynamic of this flowing state. We have to go through each state. We go from ventral vagal, we go down to sympathetic, and then lower to shut down. And then to get out of shutdown, we have to start to mobilize, right? Up into to the more autonomic system around sympathetic, and then up again to ventral vagal. And we do this through a process that Dr. Porges calls neuroception. It really is what it really means, I should say, is this ability to be looking at all times inside our bodies, outside our bodies, reading the room inside and out at all times to then determine where we need to go with those states and responses. And then the last concept around polyvagal is that we need to be co-regulated, that our bodies long for co-regulation, that it is with others that can help soothe us. The best example of this is, if you've ever been in therapy, is that although I can talk fast in teaching, most of the time in therapy, I keep my energy very like this. How are you? How are you doing? Can you tell me about that? If you've been in therapy, you know that we try to keep you grounded and regulated, right? If we start matching your energy and you come in extremely dysregulated, it's going to be really hard for you to soothe and calm. And so in some ways, we're not just helping you co-regulate and model, we're matching the energy we want you to come to. And that is the concept of polyvagal theory. It really is the science of connection. That connection with others, getting into a more ventral vagal state, is how we want to try to be more often than fighting or fleeing or fighting or completely shutting down. And so you'll see in your workbook that we want to learn to map our attachment system. And what that means is that we're identifying the state, and then once we recognize the state, especially if it's an unregulated state, we want to learn how to get our bodies back into a more ventral vagal state. And we want to identify the triggers, the things that get us out of that ventral vagal, and what we are, Deb Dana calls glimmers, these moments of connection, these little positive flickers of I always think of it as like little, like June bugs or dragonflies or little lights blinking. It's like, oh, there's a glimmer. There's a place where I could find connection and I feel good. And so we're going to talk more about those in the healing toolbox portion. But if you look at your journal, you will see on these pages that I have a whole map of the nervous system, explaining the ladder, explaining these concepts, and as I said, we will do some exercises that will help you understand what to do. Now lastly, the whole concept is that the body has a state response in the nervous system, and then we have to make up a story to understand it. So the idea is that story follows state. So I have to make up a story about why I'm feeling anxious, but maybe I was wired perhaps to be more anxious, and so sometimes the story is not accurate, but I have to find a way, because the brain is always trying to understand, and the brain is wired towards negativity, to explain that state. And so you can see here that in the journal, it explains each of those. So we'll come back to understanding that, but here's what I want you to keep in mind. If you had a more collapsed, controlling, rageful, narcissistic parent, if you had a more emotionally dysregulated so much of the time, you were going either very much in and out of connection all the time, your nervous system was trying to meet theirs, and there often is no predictability and no safety, and so you're trying to choose safety and connection, but so often you have to go into protection because these parents at the core are not emotionally safe. And so for narcissism, I would say if it's a classic presentation or a more covert one outside of anger, you're not going to get a lot of attunement and mirroring your nervous system state. You're going to have to match their state or remove yourself in some way, because they are not going to be able to truly face-to-face, eye-to-eye see you and help you regulate. They're sort of doing the world like this. And so all of those yucky feelings, you often begin to internalize as being your fault. Those states, that feeling unsettled, that feeling rejected, that cold or withdrawn behavior, you're trying to connect, but you've learned you can't. And so something is wrong with you. And the sort of similar dynamic, but a little bit different, would be in borderline, where you're always trying to get connection, But remember, as in typical with borderline, the source of safety, which is disorganized attachment, is also the source of fear. And never is that more true than for borderline. Now, as I'll keep saying, remember, borderline has a wide spectrum, and so you may not have seen rage, but you will have seen relational instability, emotional instability, and often mood instability as a result that can just change literally, moment to moment. And of course, depending upon the presentation of narcissism, you can see, like I said, really a lack of empathy or an excessive focus on anger and punishment. But at the core, both of these types of parenting are going to struggle with helping you be co-regulated, helping you feel good and calm in your body. Your body had to always figure out a plan of attack and was always responding to their nervous systems. And so that is what gets activated in your adult life. As a parent, as a partner, as a friend or whatever, your job is to learn to not only identify all of the triggers and all of that stuff, but matching it with what's happening in your body, knowing that we have to always come back to this concept of calming and soothing our nervous systems and into connection in order to heal this part of our story. So next, we're going to talk about how all of this plays out from our attachments, experiences in our body system, to relational issues, to how we see ourselves, and how all of that plays out with narcissistic and/or borderline parents who struggle.